Hi, my name is Plamen Akaliyski and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Keio University in Japan. I'll present a paper titled A Community of Shared Values, Dimensions and Dynamics of Cultural Integration in the European Union, which I have been working on together with my colleagues Christian Welzel and Joseph Hien. This is only the first part of a larger project that I'm going to work on in the next 3 years. Over the last few decades, the EU has attempted to establish itself as a community of shared values. These values are enumerated in its treaties as follows: respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities, pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between women and men. The EU also stands behind these values by promoting them in its internal and external affairs and legally binding member states to comply to them. Moreover, these values serve an inspirational role in enhancing European citizens' feelings of belongingness to a community bound by fundamental principles that distinguishes it from the rest of the world. But whether the EU is a community of shared values is increasingly contested, as evident in a series of crises, like the euro crisis, refugee crisis, Brexit, and lastly, the rule of law crisis, whereby frictions occur most saliently along deeper cultural divisions between northern and southern, as well as western and eastern European member states. Therefore, our global research question is, to what extent can the EU be defined as a community of shared values? Using European value study data from 1990 to 2017, we operationalized the EU's officially promoted values in 7 domains: personal freedom, individual autonomy, social solidarity, ethnic tolerance, civic honesty, gender equality, and liberal democracy. And then we analyzed the level and change in the public's acceptance of these values. Specifically, we asked the following 5 research questions. Do the member states endorse the values promoted by the EU? Do these values change in the direction desired by the EU? Are the value distances between the member states negligibly small? Are the values of the member states converging within the EU and between previously identified cultural zones? And are the values of the member states distinct from those of other European nations? The answers to these questions vary significantly between the specific values we analyze. Regarding the first question, however, we find that by 2017, EU member states uniformly pass our threshold of 50% support on all 7 value domains. It is also encouraging for the EU that this support has been increasing over the last 3 decades, on average, and on 5 out of the 7 value domains. The change is most pronounced in support for personal freedom and gender equality. Turning to the distances between member states, we find that they are significantly large on 3 of the domains: personal freedom, ethnic tolerance, and gender equality. Moreover, the most disturbing finding from an EU perspective is that these distances have been increasing over time in almost all domains, and especially in freedom and ethnic tolerance. Lastly, we examine how unique the EU is in embracing these values. We find that in almost all aspects, the EU supports its values more strongly than European countries outside of the EU, especially in personal freedom and gender equality. However, paradoxically, the EU supports these values to a lower degree than the non-EU countries that are part of the European Free Trade Agreement, namely Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland. Then we turn to disentangling this process by looking at the dynamics within previously identified cultural groups of countries within Europe, which we call cultural zones. What we discovered is that countries belonging to these 4 cultural zones were not only distinguishable in their level of support for EU values in the early 90s, but they also experienced change at different speed thereafter. Protestant countries led that development, followed by Catholic Western countries, then ex-communist Western, and lastly by Orthodox countries. We see these dynamics also by plotting the countries based on their values using multidimensional scaling. At the end of the Cold War, three distinct groups are distinguishable: Protestant, Catholic, and ex-communist. By 2017, these cultural zones have become even more pronounced, and the ex-communist countries have split in two based on their historical, religious legacies that can be traced back to at least the 11th century. Within Protestant countries, we could not distinguish between EU members and non-members. They all support EU values to the strongest degree of all countries in Europe. In summary, member states support the EU values strongly and increasingly over time, which is encouraging for the European Union. The EU member states are also notably distinct culturally from Eastern European non-EU nations, which in line with social identity theory should foster a sense of belongingness to a community. However, we find an increasing disagreement between member states on most values, and that may continue to drive internal tensions in the EU. Traditional cultural fault lines remain and even intensify, which should be alarming for EU policymakers. Therefore, our findings are mixed, and they lead us to conclude the EU evolves into a distinct value-sharing community, but at different speeds. In our future research, we focus on explaining the value difference and trends, particularly regarding the role of modernization, education, and existential security, as well as social identities and cultural backlash. Thank you very much for your interest in my research, and I look forward to meeting you virtually at the webinar.